Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar Talking Tech. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items just so you know how to participate in today's event. You've joined the presentation listening using your computer speaker system by default. If you prefer to join over the telephone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You'll have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. It is now my pleasure to introduce your first speaker, Ines Aga, Global Strategic Insights.
All right, thank you so much, Chloe. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining our webinar today. My name is Ines. I work at GFK's Strategic Insights team, as Chloe already said, and I'm very happy that we will spend an hour together and talk about the trends in the global technical consumer goods markets. And I'm not alone today. I brought a colleague with me, and so it's over to you, Ercin.
Thank you, Ines, and I would like to give a warm welcome from my side as well, also for the new joiners. My name is Ercin, and I work for the MI supply chain here at GFK. Before we start off, we would like to give you some further information about what are we going to talk about and where we drive our data from at GFK. So my part will consist mainly insights from supply chain side, which is here presented on the left side. What is GFK's market intelligence about, and what is the supply chain is about. I would like to tell you more about this now. If you're looking into the supply chains, vendors are using distributors, which are key players, especially in the IT ecosystem, as being long-standing partners of vendors. And GFK's MI supply chain is based on the sell-through data from these distributors, as they have a great network of POS retailers and resellers and help vendors to distribute their products efficiently to steer the supply chains. Therefore, with GFK's MI supply chain, also known as the distribution panel, which has the largest distribution partner network across 45 countries, we try to answer those key business questions on topics such as channel management, product management, and sales management, and so on. Basically, once we are looking into the demand, not from the end customer, but rather looking into the retailers and reseller side, what are they purchasing, we can also think about what will happen next in the POS side. And the biggest advantage of the MI supply chain is that we are able to combine the data set with the POS panel, so the MI sales tracking, which then enables us to have further advanced analytics. For my part, I will mostly focus on the supply chain data, as the shortages remain a hot topic. Meanwhile, and Ines will be focused on the sales tracking side. Now I will hand it over to Ines.
Thank you. So as Ercin said, the analysis we will be talking about in the first part of the webinar, they will all focus on GFK's market intelligence sales tracking. So that's the sales from B2B and B2C, from retailers and resellers to the end customer. And by this, you will be able to see what is being sold, so what product, which features are successful, what prices are there in the market, and also the channel structure. Is it online? Is it offline? Is it a specialist? Is it a generalist? And all of them together, this information we track weekly and monthly and across the complete technical consumer goods markets. With that as introduction, I will jump right into the agenda so that you know what is happening today. I will start with the first part, which is booming demand, today's performance in perspective. And I would like to start with the status quo for the TCG markets. Does the disruption continue? I would like to give you a perspective and compare the market development of today with the pre-pandemic 2019. As obviously everyone is aware of, 2020 was not a usual year. And so sometimes the trends, the growth rates we see look distorted or exaggerated. And this is why I would like to go into a more long-term perspective and compare to 2019. Then a deep dive into two of the sectors which are driving the market dynamics, that is IT and telecom. And the last part will be the increasing prices as a first indication of supply chain challenges. After that, I will hand back to Ertin, who is focusing on limited supply, how shortages impact growth. And he will talk about distribution and supply today. He will also do a deep dive on computing, on processes. What do we see on demand side? What do we see about prices? And the last part will be what's up next. Look at the bright side. So hopefully we will end up on a high note. Let us start with the first question. So we have the status quo. Did the disruption continue? The disruption by COVID-19? And the short answer is yes. The first 4 months of the year, so now we are talking about the data from January to April 2021. And this is still very much characterized by COVID-19, by lockdowns in many countries. And so work at home, stay at home, all these COVID-19 trends continue to have a huge effect on the TCG markets. And the total TCG market could grow in the first 4 months of the year by 32.2%. And that's amazing. That's a huge growth rate. And so we are talking about a total market volume of $282 billion. If we look at the different sectors, you can see that all the sectors were able to contribute to growth. All the sectors were able to grow double digit. Pack leader is telecom down here, which was able to grow by 37%. For telecom sector, 2020 was a more difficult year, and now it's bouncing back with this amazing performance. IT was very successful already last year, and it did not stop being successful, but the success is going on, and we still see growth of 31% compared to 2020, but also the domestic appliances, consumer electronics, and also smaller categories like photo, all of them have a very good beginning of the year. As I said before, we are now talking about an unusual year of 2020. And so if we compare the growth rates to 2020, we would compare with the month of the first lockdowns last year. And so some of the growth rates might look funny. And this is why we would like to go into the long-term perspective and compare to pre-pandemic 2019. And if we look at the market sales, the USD value growth, I would like to compare the growth rates of 2021 versus 2020. That's the filled in column. And then the growth rates of 2021 versus 2019. And that's this shaded column with the little stripes. And you can see that even compared to 2019, most of the sectors had a very good beginning of the year with double-digit growth. The only exception is CE and photo. This is slightly decreasing on revenue side compared to 2019, but for all the other categories, we see a successful performance. And we believe that this will go on. Some of the trends we were talking about, like work at home, like stay at home, will still have a positive impact on TCG markets. If maybe you participated already in our last webinar, we talked about the consumer behavior and how consumers said they would like to go on working from home, let's say maybe 2 days a week or maybe once in a while or whatever. So people, for example, will still continue to need technical equipment for their home office. And this will have a long-lasting positive impact on the TCG markets. Also products which help you with your household chores, for example, we expect will still be successful even when COVID-19 hopefully vanishes maybe or gets better across all the countries. We have looked at the sectors. Let's now focus on the different regions. How did they fare in the first few months of 2021? Again, we have three numbers. We have the growth rates of 2020 versus 2019 for the first 4 months of the year. We have the growth rates of 2021 versus 2020 and 2021 versus 2019. Last year, or at the end of the last year, growth was especially driven by developed regions. They were also hit by COVID-19, of course, but here governments did huge subsidy schemes, spent a lot of money to help their citizens, to help companies, to keep people in their jobs. And so they were not as hit as hard as, let's say, the emerging regions. And so last year, growth was especially driven by developed regions. But we were already expecting, and this has now happened, that emerging regions catch up. And if you look at the growth figures, you can see that all the countries, all the regions could grow very successfully. Let's start with emerging Asia, for example, plus 39% compared to 2020, still 9% above the same level of 2019. China plus 42% if you compare to 2020. Again, keep in mind, this is comparing to the first lockdown periods last year. So if we compare to 2019, we're talking about 15% plus. Developed Asia plus 18%, Western Europe plus 28%, Eastern Europe plus 34%. So this is really sustainable growth across the regions. Let's try and take a further look maybe into the future. We were now talking about TCG markets. What about the economy in general? When will the economies recover? And this is now a forecast done by OECD. And they estimate how long it will take for each of the countries to recover their pre-pandemic GDP per capita. You have the mark here for today. That's the end of the second quarter 2021. We have the first countries which have already returned to their pre-pandemic GDP, for example, China, for example, Korea, Russia, or the United States. A few other countries are expected to recover mid of 2021 or end of 2021, for example, Germany or India. For India, I would believe that there is a little question mark. If you think of the recent COVID-19 outbreak they had and also lockdowns across the country, then I would say, or I would expect that recovery might be delayed for that country, for India. Other countries, for example, Italy, Netherlands, but also in South America, Colombia or Brazil are expected to recover until the end of 2022. Also, Great Britain, back to Europe, is expected to recover in mid of 2022. They had a very successful vaccination program, which obviously helps with economic recovery. But here the question mark or the impact is coming from Brexit. Now that the transition period is over, border costs will go up, and this will have implications on trade and therefore on their macroeconomic performance. And then we have a couple of other countries which will take longer, with Argentina down at the bottom over here, where OECD expect that they will need until 2025, 2026 until they recover. This has a lot to do with domestic issues like the high inflation rates and also macroeconomic imbalances, which are a challenge for growth. Let's now focus on sectors which are driving market dynamics. Let's start with IT. So we talked already about work at home, which is a driver. And work at home doesn't only mean that you need a computer. Of course you do. And so the mobile PC is, let's say, the first device, the basis device everyone needs. And mobile PCs were able to grow by 27% in the first 4 months of 2021. Now you have your mobile PC and then you start working and maybe it's not as comfortable as you would like to. So we have a very good performance of mice, plus 28%, keyboards, plus 33% growth, and also monitors, plus 45%. Meetings are going online as well, a lot of video calls as we are doing at the moment. And this has a positive impact for headsets. This is only PC headsets. If we would take Bluetooth headsets in account, this might even be an even better performance. And also webcams were able to grow by 227%, which is an amazing performance. Who would have thought that, let's say, 2 years ago? And now everyone works at home, learns at home, plays at home, watches a movie, whatever you do. And that's, a little test for your networking infrastructure at home. If everyone is there at the same time, and what about the bandwidth? And so routers, repeaters, power line adapters get more and more important, and we're also able to benefit with positive growth rates. Repeaters, power line adapters especially needed to increase the coverage in your home, to get Wi-Fi into every room, into every corner, wherever you need it. And this is why those two categories also perform very well. And at last, we have printers, inkjet printing devices as an example. I talked to some friends who have school kids, and they said, well, they get a lot of sheets they have to work on, and so a printer might come in handy. And so printers were also able to profit with 26% growth rate in the first 4 months of 2021. Entertainment at home has been a big topic last year, and you now see the year-on-year growth. So this is always comparing, for example, December 20, how is it growing compared to 2019, the same month? And this is for gaming products only. So gaming PCs, gaming mobile PCs, gaming mice, gaming keyboards, and gaming monitors. And last year, this has been very successful. Well, we had a lot of lockdowns. People were not really able to go out or not really able to travel. And so entertainment at home was a huge trend. Now the growth rates for these categories are slowing down. They are still very positive with 19–20% for monitors and PCs, around 5 or 7% for keyboards and mice, but it's not the same level obviously as last year. And as now the COVID-19 rules ease, as people are allowed to go out again, do more things outside, maybe travel again, we expect that budgets will shift and that entertainment at home will decrease further. Exception might be TVs. The question is if they can profit from the ongoing football championship, the European Football Championship or Copa Americana. We look at the numbers for Europe, and so far they did not have a big impact on TV sales. So for former years, one would have expected that World Cup is coming on or European Championships are coming on and people buy a new TV. This year, the sales push has been rather limited. Also, the promotion activities in the countries have been limited. And also for TVs, one reason for that might be that a lot of people bought a new TV already last year. And if you replaced your TV already last year, then yeah, most likely you won't do that again this year. Maybe this will change if your team, if your country goes far into the tournament, reaches, I don't know, the semis or the finals. Maybe these countries will experience a sales push later on in the tournament, but in the weeks leading up, as I said, the sales push was rather limited. Right, let us focus on the telecom sector next. Telecom on global level, you see the growth rates plus 37%, and last year it was down by minus 18%. This is revenue growth in US dollars. And the growth is coming from all the regions, plus 27, plus 32%, plus 47% even for China. Again, this is comparing to 2020. So if we now focus on the different categories, we again have this comparison 2021 versus 2020 with the filled columns and 2021 versus 2019 with these shaded columns. Smartphones were able to grow by 36% or 9% compared to 2019. This is revenue growth. If we look at smartphones on the unit side, they also grow, but not as strong as on revenue side. So we have increasing prices which help the revenue, but the units perform not as well as the revenue side. Wearables is an ongoing topic, 66% or even 92% if we compare growth, if we compare to 2019. Well, this health topic is obviously very related to COVID-19. A lot of people started running during the lockdown period or decided maybe they would have to look after themselves, and wearables were able to profit from that. And then at last we have mobile headsets, mobile headphones, which were able to grow by 42 and 91%. So telecom sector is very successful, but the growth is especially driven by accessories and not so much by the smartphones themselves. If we look at the smartphones, we see that the 5G standard has been gaining shares rapidly. If we look at October 20, so last year, 43% of the revenue of the smartphone revenue was realized with smartphones which support 5G already. And now this number is already up to 65%. This might be not so much demand driven, because depending on the country or region you live in, the 5G coverage is not complete everywhere. But if you buy a new phone and if you pay, I don't know how many euros or dollars for the new phone, then maybe you want to have 5G to be on the safe side. Or if you're looking for a specific model and it just has 5G, then you have it yourself as well. But it doesn't seem as if consumers are very actively looking for 5G yet. For the smartwatches and sport watches, we have this health trend. So 49% of the revenue is already generated with the smartwatches which have a blood oxygen sensor. 10% with smartwatches, sport watches, which can track your blood pressure. And then we have sleep tracking, which seems to be standard now. So nearly every device has the sleep tracking function already integrated. So this health topic is one successful or one growth opportunity for the smartwatches. On the mobile headset side, we see especially good performance of true wireless devices. They were able to grow by 58% on global level, while the non-wireless devices, the non-true wireless devices, also were positive with plus 13%, which is very well, but obviously not as successful as the true wireless devices. And this is true for all the regions. So all the regions had a very good performance for these devices. We talked about products. Let us also look quickly at the channels. And this is now giving you an overview how the online channel is developing, how the online channel is growing compared to the traditional retailers. And if we look at last year, we always had very positive growth rates for online, and this is still going on this year. So if you look at the last week, this is week 15 in 2021, 24% growth for online retail. If we take the complete year 2021 together, we have an average growth of plus 59% for online retail. Most successful were online retailers which are click and mortar shop. That means it's not only online, but they have a shop somewhere. Why is that? Because consumers know this shop already. They have a certain level of trust. They maybe get some kind of advice. They can call. They can have a video chat or whatever. Get some personal contact. And so these click and mortar shops were most successful on the online side. The traditional retail has suffered during COVID-19. It looks, if you look at the last week, it looks as if traditional retail is bouncing back to growth with plus 112%. But please be careful if you look at that number. So 112% growth sounds very, very good. But keep in mind that now we are talking about the lockdown periods last year. So this growth rate is comparing to the lockdown last year. And so this huge growth number is calculated. If we would compare that to 2019, so to a more normal year, let's say, then traditional retail would still be down with minus 8%, and the online retail is still growing by plus 97% in week 15, 2021. So the demand for e-commerce is constant and it's sustainable, and the traditional retail was not yet able to recover from COVID-19. The last chapter I would like to focus on is the question about increasing prices. And if you look at the price development for the TCG market in total, this is the growth of the average price compared to last year's period. So growth of the average price in April 21 compared to April 2020, for example. And you see the thick gray line that the prices are going up strongly. At the moment, we have a plus of around 20% for TCG in total, plus 20% for IT, even around plus 30% for consumer electronics. And telecom is more or less flat in April, but if you look at April 2020, we already had this little peak, so we are still on a high level for telco as well. Why are prices increasing so strong? So we have, of course, a very high demand, but we also see increasing raw material prices, for example. But the price increase is coming from mass market segments. So it's not a shift in product mix, for example, or it's not a premiumization effect, but it's really for mass market segments where we usually would expect that prices are going down. If you look, for example, at TVs, this is a 60-inch LCD TVs, plus 3% growth of average prices in the last 12 months. If you go back 12 months even further, then the prices are down by minus 12%. Webcam prices have been increasing plus 28%. Ultra-thin mobile PCs plus 5%. Before they were down by minus 9%. 27-inch monitors plus 8%. Inkjet multifunctional printers plus 24%. So this price increase can be seen across the sectors. It can be seen across the products. And as I said before, it's not because it's a better product, a higher value product, but it's the standard mass market segments which see these increasing prices. So we had the high demand, and we also have high commodity prices, exploding costs. Just a few examples. We have oil, crude oil. The price increased plus 49% in 21 so far. We have steel plus 17%, lithium for batteries and so on plus 91%. Not really commodity, but still needed for IT devices, LCD panels, depending on the screen size. Saw a price increase of 12 to 18%, and then shipping costs exploded. This is now based on the hardware index, but also other indices say the same, that shipping costs increased in May 2021 compared to 1 year ago by 274%. Obviously, the ship stuck in the Suez Canal didn't make things better, and now that the port of Shenzhen was closed due to a COVID-19 outbreak, this will make things even more difficult. So we have the high price and also supply chain disruptions due to COVID-19. And with that, one other reason might be the chip shortages, which contribute, and chip shortages and also supply chain disruptors. Those are the topic my colleague Ertin would like to focus on, and so I would like to hand over to you.
Thank you, Ines. That was very insightful. Definitely, chip shortages and supply chain disruptions are two very hot topics currently, and in fact have been for a while now. And I would like to now focus on what supply chain data tells us about this. So first of all, maybe to step back, just to mention that during the lockdowns, distributors were key partners who ensured the supply of products and were feeding the supply for immediate demanded product groups. As once the pandemic hit the markets and the announcement of the lockdowns, distributors needed to suddenly ship more to the B2B environment, and this resulted in unusual peaks, which were related to the immediate needs of working from home and also study from home. But now we are actually saying here the pressure is on. And why actually do we say this? Let's look at the next slide to start with an overview. In this slide, you see the global weekly sales from distributors to retailers and resellers. In other words, what we call it as the heartbeat of distribution. Prior to 2020, so in 2019, you can see here, the heartbeats were pretty similar to, of previous years. So we see the similar trends in 2018, 2017, but of course in 2020, as the markets were disrupted, the distribution heartbeat experience has stumbled, and we didn't have this usual beats that we usually experience. The usual, for instance, the March large sell-through did not peak as much. This had a lot to do with the urgent needs and the preponing of the IT-related infrastructure. Another one was the Prime Day. Ramp up was not there, as the Prime Day was move to later in the year, and so on. During this time, in 2020, we observed that the IT sector had growth both in value and volume, as consumers bought, for example, laptops sooner than they planned, or monitors because they needed more. For other sectors, such as telecom, we can say rather was stagnating, and for office sector, it was decreasing. But now, once we take a closer look at 2021, we immediately see a strong peak at the end of Q1, even higher than the peak in 2019, which was already quite strong. So this is really positive, of course, which also raises the question of if we are back to the pre-COVID times already. As it is still early saying anything on this matter, we had quite strong performances maintained from end of last year. Despite the distributors exceeded the expectations in Q1, sales through has been recently, here you can see it slowing down, as the news of global shortages of many goods reflected the disruption of the pandemic combined with the chip shortages in particular, and is expected to bring some uncertainties to most industries that are reliant on these. But apart from the slowdown in the markets in the recent weeks, what else do we observe from our supply chain data? On the left side, we see the weekly sales of goods sold through by distributors and the average selling prices. Looking at week 13 and onwards, where we see actually a strong peak, we see a gradual decrease on the market, especially from week 14 to 22 compared to the previous year, same period. And this has actually resulted in 9% decrease in the volume side. As the Q1's resilience is slowing, we see also first indication of supply pressure, which then triggers prices to soar. In the same time, what this means is the global level average selling prices is about 32% higher than the same period last year in terms of US dollars. This is highly due to the Western Europe, where average selling prices also goes up by 31%, and also 19% in Central and Eastern Europe. But of course, this is not only limited to these regions, as for instance in Middle East, so the prices goes up by 2-digit figures in terms of USD. But what is the reason behind the slowing down of volume from distributors? Looking at the amount of inventory of distributors, we see a gradual drop in the number of selling items from distributors to resellers, which is actually another indication of shortages. Starting from week 2 onwards, we see a downward trend continuing down to week 22. This indicates us that the chip shortages and disruptions put supply side under pressure. In fact, looking at a longer period, so not to a specific week, an average number of selling items from distributors to retailers and resellers dropped 9% between week 32 to 22 against the beginning of the year. So from calendar week 1 to 12. This contributes greatly to overall price increases that we have seen in the previous slide, and also signifies the importance of product availability, as this will be key for success in 2021, as shortages disrupt also consumer choices, and also changing brand loyalty and so on. All right, now let's take a deeper dive into computing market and processors. This is now what we call a tier overlay analysis, which shows a percentage of goods sold out by retailers and resellers that was sourced via distributors, which is a unique combination of the two data sets we have, the two panels. This analysis was made on computers aggregated, so which includes mobile PCs, desk PCs, and media tablets. It's visible that the share of goods being supplied indirectly, so by distributors, intensifies. Here's an example between Western Europe and Central Eastern Europe, but in other regions, this share is also going through similar experiences. This is particularly visible in the CE region, as the year began with a record for sourcing computer of about 106%, which indicates that higher volume was sold through by distributors to retailers and resellers than retailers and resellers sold out to the end user. So actually, what can we understand from here is that retailers and resellers are stocking up for perhaps for the high demand, expected high demand, or expected higher price increases, and also in the same time, distributors acted as a key partners to compensate shortages. This is also visible in the Western Europe, as the share is higher than ever. And also in the beginning of the year until about May. Then in May, both regions, we see a level off to the previous year's shares. And overall, in certain months, these PCs were actually even sourced over 80% in the market by distributors. And also, apart from the PC hardware, there's also accessories. We see a similar behavior for monitors, webcams, and headsets, and keying devices, and so on. So basically, all the working at home hardware ecosystem, even in the beginning of the year, 85% of the monitors that was sold out was sourced via distributors. So we see there is a strong sourcing behavior from distributors, but how did the pricing develop more in details? Now let's take a closer look as an example for notebooks here. So this slide shows the regional differences of monthly average selling prices in USD. And it is important to underline that the notebook prices have been actually surging since the middle of last year. So if you see a trend here, already higher in CE, in MEA, it started from October onwards, and in some months in CIS. And also, what is actually important to notice here is that 2021 for all the regions started at a higher rate than in 2020. So basically, in terms of USD, we see that from January to May 2021, the prices, average selling prices in Western Europe is about 13% higher distributors, that compared to the 17% in CIS and also 19% in the Middle East, and even reaching to the level of 24% in CE. As I mentioned previously, product availability and logistics are a key focus here, as chip shortages, in addition to this supply chain, comes rather costly. And what this line chart tells us about that, except for April here, the number of different portables sold through by distributors was about 100 to 150 items lower, and even reaching around 200 items in May was lower compared to previous year. And in our opinion, this is also another indication of shortages, and which really puts pressure on the prices. And the raising prices are actually not only affecting notebooks or computers, but prices are also raising in processors alone as well, which we are tracking in the supply chain panel. The average selling prices for processors between January to May 2021 compared to the previous same period last year is about 18% higher in Western Europe, and also 17% in CE. Along with 6% in CIS and 4% in MEA. And to even mention further product scope, this is actually very similar to other products such as memory modules and main boards, as both products reached to quite high levels recently, and actually to the levels that we haven't seen before. And now, I think this is enough about the shortages part and a little bit on the bad news side, but I would like to conclude this part on shortages is that in summary, we do observe immediately the indications of chip shortages along with supply chain disruptions, which certainly have an effect on price implications. And then this is actually a phenomenon is likely to remain as a major topic in the upcoming months. Now, actually, let's take a look at the bright side of things and what can we see at next, what is expected in the short term and also in the second half of the year. First of all, the demand from generalists are thriving. They are ready for reopening of the shops. You can see the volume growth is in the last 10 to 11 weeks compared to the same period last year. Is started from 12% in Western Europe, and that continues all the way to 74% in LATAM. Of course, less restrictions are enabling this immense growth for generalists. And this volume growth is driven by product categories such as visual cams, audio home systems, headsets for obvious reasons of work and study at home. But of course, this is not only limited to these trends, as restrictions are being lifted with good weather. Well, not particular today in Germany, but people want to spend more time outside. That's why we also see a ramp up for core wearables, e-boards, mobile enhancements, and so on. So what Ines already confirmed with high sales in these products is also likely to continue. And last but not least, to conclude with my part, I would like to show the overall channel value development between year to date in 2021 against 2020. And what is quite stunning is that the global total value growth is about 19% higher than last year, which is immense. This has, of course, a lot to do with the price increases as well. But the B2B demand is strong and is still increasing in this growing market. We see a bounce back from large resellers, as they were quite affected last year. They were able to increase their share from 19.9 to 14.9 to 15.5%. And of course, this is also due to digitization. This keeps driving this demand, as well as the still working from home, which is definitely here to stay for many months or many years to come. We already see, of course, the value growth so far, but during the third and fourth quarter, also the education spending from governments and also large EU spending to rebuild the post-COVID-19 Europe, which is planned to establish a greener and more digital EU, among other things, will certainly have impacts on the second half of the year. And this is what we also expect to see in our data in the second half of the year. All right. Now, to wrap up of what we already talked about, in the left side, we can see what we already talked about is that in the technical consumer goods, still work and study at home remains an important driver of IT sales, and of course is along with the needs and also plans of digital transformations. Ines mentioned that telco bounces back, especially with the success of accessories. But overall, so far 2021 has really impressive results for TCG markets. However, as a warning sign, there are already indications of shortages and disruptions, which we track both in our panels. This, along with the rising commodity prices, triggers price increases in many product groups. And this will be all from my side. And thank you all for tuning in today. And I will now hand it back over to Ines for conclusion and outlook.
Right, thank you, Ercin. So we talked about TCG market today. What do we expect for tomorrow? The pressure is on, as Ercin explained, but we do not see any disaster yet. On the contrary, a very positive situation in the first 4 months of 2021. So we saw that IT, office, and telecom are supporting industry growth. They are not the only ones, but those are the categories we focused on for today. Computing, especially on the distribution side, we expect will be more volatile with a high demand and going up and going down. We believe that entertainment at home will slow down as budgets shift. Ercin talked about the government investments in IT infrastructure, green IT coming from the EU, and which will provide an additional push. And we believe that shortages and price increases will remain with us for the second half of the year 2021. And with the shortages and also with the disruption within the supply chain, product availability will be a key 2021 success factor. It's important to have the right product available for the consumer at the right time in the right channel. And here it's important to get the correct sourcing and with the help of distributors in that case to get the model availability even when the markets are suffering from shortages. So what did we talk about today? Just so you keep in mind, all the analysis were based on GfK's market intelligence, so sales tracking, with weekly insights to maximize your sales. We track sales performance of you and competitors. We can contrast online and offline sales. The tracking takes place on SKU level. We talk about prices, and those all together make up the point of sales reports done by GfK, and those are the numbers the first part of the webinar was based on. And the second part of the webinar, Ercin, if you could explain again what supply chain is about.
Sure. The second part of the webinar was based on the supply chain data, which is sell-through data from distributors. And GfK, we have the largest distributor network, and we track around 200 product groups. And by default, we have a weekly panel in order to have strong indications of what's going to happen in the market next. And while we're doing this, we answer key business questions as also the market shares, product and sales management, and also channel management as well.
So now we have been talking, and it's now up to you as part of our audience. In case there are any questions you might have, please enter them into the text box, or maybe you did already. If you didn't, now is maybe a good opportunity. If there's anything you would like us to cover, you would like us to answer.
Thank you, Ines and Ercin. And we're now going to begin answering some of the questions submitted during today's presentation. As Ines said, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. So our first question is for Ines. What do you expect for the rest of 2021? How will TCG markets perform?
That's very much depending on the region we're talking about, the product we're talking about. We touched a little bit already. So for example, work at home, we expect that this will continue to be a big topic, as consumers would like to continue work from home, maybe not every day, but every second day or maybe 2 days a week or whatever works. And this has a positive impact on the technical consumer goods because you need the infrastructure at home. And this will mean also, let's say in a couple of years, people will have to replace again. So buy a new monitor again or a new keyboard or whatever they have. Also other trends, we had all these stay at home when people cooked more at home, or also got some support for their household chores, because if you have job and kids and household and everything, you're looking for support, you're looking for devices which make your life easier and simpler. And for these devices which help, which support you, we would believe that they will be also successful for 2021. So on revenue side, we really expect that 2021 will have a double-digit growth in dollars. On unit side, I would say not as successful because of the rising prices. Revenue will be much higher than the units growth, but still we believe that we will end up with a positive development also on unit side. The big question mark is still COVID-19. So if another wave is coming with all the Delta variants and I don't know what is going on, this will of course have a big impact, but let's stay optimistic and say no Delta wave is coming, and hopefully then this is how the market will end up.
Great, thank you. So next, a question for Ercin. Could you expand a little bit more on office products? What's the outlook from the distribution side?
Yes, of course. So in terms of the printing devices, previously there was not so much positive developments prior to 2021. It was rather a declining market. But actually, year to date, also confirmed by the POS side from Ines, that we actually see especially a value increase in the sector. There is a momentum. But this also varies regionally. For instance, between CE and Western Europe is quite different. But overall, printing devices are increasing very slightly in Western Europe in the volume, but has higher shares of growth in terms of value. But in Central and Eastern Europe, for instance, the value increase is actually quite high. If I remember correctly, it was about 25% in total year to date compared to last year. So we expect a strong year for printing devices as people begin to need printing home. Thank you.
Thanks, Ercin. Another one for Ines here. Could you talk a little about the performance of networking devices? Is this especially driven by Wi-Fi 6?
So Wi-Fi 6 has been very successful for networking devices, but it is still a niche market segment. So yeah, Wi-Fi 6 contributed to a good performance, but it was not driven by Wi-Fi 6. The networking devices were especially driven by mesh. So just in case you're not into detail in that market, mesh promises you that you have a seamless Wi-Fi across your complete flat or home by connecting different routers, repeaters, different networking devices together. And this is really what was pushing sales on networking side. So for Wi-Fi 6, still a niche, and I would expect that this is more a topic for future presentations or for future months.
Great, thank you. And another one for Erçin. How has the online channel ramped up in the last weeks?
Yeah, the onliners actually finished the last year quite strong, and of course now with the reopening of the shops, a drive shifted more to the offliners in B2C channels, as we see also some decrease in the last 2-3 months for offliners, but these figures are also of course compared to the last year same period, so which was actually very high result for online channels. So overall, temporarily in certain product groups such as mobile PCs, they cannot keep up with the high growth rates compared to last year, but as the promotional period is on the horizon, they will certainly pick up later on.
Wonderful. And someone from the audience has asked if you're going to be sharing this presentation. I don't know if either of you can answer that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Everybody who would like to receive it, they can just download it from our website.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, I think that's all the questions that we've had time for today. I'd like to thank you, Ines and Erçin, for your presentation today, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Once you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a survey on the presentation, and we'd appreciate if you could complete that and provide your feedback. On behalf of GfK and our presenters, thank you so much for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your day.